They called Julian Thorne the god of Wall Street. He had the 50-story tower, the private jets, and the power to crush companies with a single phone call. He also had Eleanor, the quiet, beautiful wife everyone assumed was just another trophy on his shelf. They were wrong. At the most lavish gala of the decade, while Julian toasted to his own greatness, Elena didn't just leave the building. She initiated a ghost protocol that had been 5 years in the making. By the time the sun hit the skyline the next morning, the billionaire hadn't just lost his money. He had lost his name, his freedom, and his reality. This is the story of the most brutal, brilliant revenge New York has ever seen. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with the specific, muted roar of extreme wealth. It was a sound composed of clinking baccarat crystal, the rustle of haute couture silk, and the murmurs of men who treated national economies like poker chips. At the center of it all stood Julian Thorne. At 42, he was the picture of American royalty, tall, with a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and eyes that held the cold, predatory glint of a shark sensing blood in the water. Tonight was his coronation. Thorne Dynamics was officially acquiring Vanguard Tech, a merger that would make Julian the first undisputed trillionaire in the sector. He held a glass of Dom Perignon, laughing at a joke made by Senator Holloway. His hand rested possessively on the lower back of his wife, Elena. "You've outdone yourself, Julian," the senator said, his eyes drifting over Elena. "And might I say, the scenery is just as impressive as the portfolio." Julian squeezed Elena's waist, just tight enough to be uncomfortable. Elena is a good luck charm. Doesn't say much, but she looks the part, doesn't she? Elena Thorne forced a smile. It was a practiced expression, one she had perfected over 5 years of marriage. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown that clung to her slender frame, diamonds dripping from her ears like frozen tears. To the world, she was the lucky orphan who had snagged the city's most eligible bachelor. To Julian, she was an accessory, necessary for the image of the stable family man, but ultimately decorative. "Thank you, Senator," Elena said softly. Her voice was melodic but faint, easily drowned out by the boisterous laughter of the men. "Go get me another drink, darling," Julian whispered, leaning into her ear. His tone wasn't a request, it was a command. "And fix your lipstick. You look pale." Elena nodded, pulling away from his grip. "Of course, Julian." As she walked away, the crowd parted for her, but their eyes were glazed over. She was invisible in plain sight. She walked toward the bar, but she didn't stop there. She continued past the heavy velvet curtains, past the security detail that gave her a polite, dismissive nod, and into the cool, empty corridor of the service exit. She paused by a large, gilded mirror. For a moment, she stared at her reflection. The fear that usually lived in her eyes was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve, a look that would have terrified Julian Thorne if he had ever bothered to look her in the eyes. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a burner phone. It was an obsolete model, cheap plastic, untraceable. She dialed a single number. "It's done," she whispered. "Execute phase 1. She snapped the phone in half, dropped it into a janitor's trash bin, and walked out the side door into the biting December wind of Fifth Avenue. She didn't look back. Inside, Julian was raising his glass for the keynote speech. "To the future," he bellowed, his voice booming over the speakers. "A future that belongs to those bold enough to take it." The crowd erupted in applause. Julian scanned the room for Elena, wanting her by his side for the photo op. He frowned. She wasn't there. He tapped his earpiece, connected to his head of security, a brute named Marcus Steele. "Marcus, where is she? I need her on stage in 2 minutes." "Checking, sir." Marcus's voice crackled. Julian kept his smile plastered on, waving to the cameras. But a minute passed, then 2. "Sir," Marcus came back, his voice sounding confused. "She's not in the ballroom. She's not in the ladies' room. The GPS on her phone. It says she's in the building, but my guys can't find her." "Find her?" Julian hissed, covering his mouth with his champagne flute. "She's probably crying in a hallway somewhere. Drag her back if you have to." But Elena wasn't crying. She was currently sitting in the back of a yellow taxi, anonymous, invisible, watching the Plaza Hotel shrink in the rearview mirror. She wasn't going home to their penthouse on Park Avenue. She was going to a place Julian didn't know existed. The clock struck midnight. At that exact moment, in the server room of the Thorn Dynamics headquarters 3 miles away, a single line of code, dormant for years, woke up. The applause was dying down. Julian was growing impatient. His grip on the podium tightened. This was supposed to be the moment he introduced his beautiful, supportive wife to seal the image of the benevolent Titan. Suddenly, a murmur rippled through the front row. It started with the CFO of Vanguard Tech, a man named Arthur Sterling. Arthur was looking at his phone, his face draining of color. Then the whisper spread to the senator, then to the board members. Phones were lighting up all over the dark room like fireflies. Julian laughed nervously. "It seems my guests are more interested in their Twitter feeds than my speech. What's the trend? Did I break the internet already?" Arthur Sterling stood up. He didn't look like a man celebrating a billion-dollar merger. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a murder. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice shaking, "you need to check your accounts." "What?" Julian scoffed. "Not now, Arthur." "Now, Julian," Arthur shouted, silencing the room. "The stock, Thorn Dynamics, it's free-falling." Julian froze. He signaled to his assistant, Sarah, who rushed onto the stage with a tablet. She was trembling. She handed him the device. Julian looked at the screen. A graph that had been steadily climbing for a decade was now a vertical red line pointing straight to hell. "What is this?" Julian roared. "Is this a glitch? Get it on the phone." "It's not a glitch, sir," Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's a dump. Massive sell-offs, but it's coming from inside." "Inside?" Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "That's impossible. My shares are locked. The board's shares are locked." "It's not the board, sir," Sarah said. "It's the shadow fund." The room spun. The shadow fund. It was Julian's secret weapon. A hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands where he funneled illegal profits, bribes for politicians, and money skimmed from pension funds. It was the dirty engine that kept his empire running. Only 2 people in the world had the biometric keys to access it: Julian and his late partner, Robert Vance. Robert Vance had died in a car accident 6 years ago, an accident Julian had arranged when Robert developed a conscience. "That account is ghosted," Julian snarled, forgetting he was on stage, forgetting the microphones were live. "Nobody can access it." "Someone just did," Arthur shouted from the floor, "and they just transferred the entire balance, $4 billion to a public charity wallet. It's gone, Julian. It's all gone. And the transaction log. It was posted to the SEC's public server. The gala erupted into chaos. Journalists who had been drinking Julian's champagne were now rushing the stage, cameras flashing like lightning. "Mr. Thorne, is it true you've been embezzling pension funds?" "Mr. Thorne, did you authorize the transfer?" Julian backed away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked for Marcus. "Get me out of here. Now!" Security guards formed a wedge, shoving photographers aside as they dragged Julian toward the exit. But the nightmare was just beginning. As they burst out of the ballroom doors, Julian's phone buzzed. It was a text message. Unknown number. He fumbled with the phone, his hands slick with sweat. He opened the message. It was a video file. He clicked play. The video showed a dimly lit room. A woman was sitting in a chair, facing the camera. She was wearing a simple grey hoodie, her hair pulled back. It was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor he knew. There was no fear, no hesitation. She looked directly into the lens, her eyes piercing. "Hello, Julian," the video Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. "If you're watching this, the shadow fund is at 0. You're probably wondering how. You thought I was just the quiet girl you picked up at a charity auction. You thought I was Robert Vance's estranged, know-nothing daughter who you could keep as a trophy to soothe your guilt." Julian stopped running in the middle of the hallway. The security guards bumped into him. "You were wrong," the voice on the phone continued. "Robert didn't just leave me his debt. He left me his code. I wrote the encryption for the shadow fund, Julian. I built the cage you locked your secrets in, and for 5 years I've been waiting for you to fill it up so I could open the door." Julian stared at the screen, his breath hitching. "Go home, Julian," Elena said, a cruel smile touching her lips. "I left you a gift in the safe, but you better hurry. The FBI is already on their way." The video ended. "Move!" Julian screamed, shoving Marcus. "Get the car! We're going to the penthouse!" "Sir, the police are blocking the main entrance," Marcus said, listening to his earpiece. "Take the helicopter!" Julian yelled. "To the roof! Now!" He had to get to the safe. He had to get the passports, the emergency diamonds, the drive with the blackmail material on the senator. If Eleanor had touched those, he was dead. As the helicopter lifted off from the roof of the plaza, Julian looked down at the city he thought he owned. Sirens were wailing from every direction, converging on his headquarters. He dialed Elena's number. It went straight to voicemail. "You think you can beat me?" he screamed into the phone. "I am Julian Thorne. I will hunt you down. I will kill you." He threw the phone against the helicopter window, cracking the glass. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he threatened was already ghosts. And the gift she left in the safe wasn't something he could use to escape. It was the final nail in his coffin. The helicopter touched down on the private helipad of the Sterling Tower on Park Avenue. The wind was howling, a chaotic symphony that matched the storm raging inside Julian Thorne's mind. He didn't wait for the rotors to stop. He ducked and ran toward the roof access door, his tuxedo jacket flapping wildly. "Wait here!" he screamed at the pilot. "Keep the engine running!" He burst into the penthouse. Usually at this hour, the lights would be dimmed to a warm amber, and the staff, his butler, Higgins, and the housekeepers, would be invisible but present, ready to take his coat and pour his scotch. Tonight, the penthouse was pitch black. "Higgins!" Julian bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Silence. He fumbled for the light switch. The crystal chandelier flickered on, revealing a scene that made his stomach drop. The apartment wasn't ransacked. It was pristine. Too pristine. The art was still on the walls. The sculptures were in place. But the personal touches, the photos, the fresh flowers, the specific arrangement of magazines on the coffee table, were gone. It felt like a model home, cold and uninhabited. Julian sprinted up the floating staircase to the master bedroom. He tore the painting of the 18th century seascape off the wall, revealing a titanium safe embedded in the concrete. His hands shook so badly, he punched the code wrong twice. 042972. The heavy steel door hissed open. Julian reached inside, expecting to feel the cool leather of his passport satchel and the velvet bags of uncut diamonds he kept for doomsday scenarios. His hand grasped nothing but air. He ripped his phone flashlight out and shone it into the safe. It was empty. The cash, 5 million in Swiss francs, was gone. The passports were gone. The hard drives containing the blackmail leverage on half of Congress were gone. In the center of the metal shelf sat a single, small object, a baby monitor. Julian stared at it, confused. They didn't have children. He grabbed it. It was taped on, a small red light blinking. Suddenly, the speaker crackled to life. "Hello, Julian." He dropped it on the floor, backing away as if it were a bomb. It was Eleanor's voice again. "You're looking for your exit strategy," the voice on the monitor said. It wasn't a recording. She was watching him. He looked around wildly for hidden cameras. "You won't find it. I burned the passports this morning while you were at the gym. And the diamonds. I donated them to the relief fund for the workers you laid off in the Detroit factory closure last year." "Where are you?" Julian screamed at the plastic device. "I'll kill you! Do you hear me?" "You're not listening, Julian. I said I left you a gift. Look under the bed." Julian fell to his knees. He crawled toward the massive California king bed. There, sitting neatly on the rug, was a thick manila envelope. He tore it open. Inside wasn't money or codes. It was a stack of photographs. Julian flipped through them, his blood turning to ice. The first photo was of him meeting a contract killer in a warehouse in New Jersey 6 years ago. The second was a bank transfer authorization, signed by him. The third was a photo of a car crash, the crash that killed his business partner, Robert Vance. But the fourth photo made him stop breathing. It was a picture of a young girl, maybe 20 years old, standing next to Robert Vance. She looked different, glasses, darker hair, heavier, but the eyes were unmistakable. It was Eleanor. "You never asked about my maiden name," the voice on the monitor said softly. "You just accepted the fake background check I planted. My name isn't Eleanor Corves. It's Eleanor Vance. Robert was my father." Julian collapsed back onto his heels. The room spun. He had married the daughter of the man he murdered. He had slept next to her for 5 years. He had brought the executioner into his own bed. "The police have copies of those photos, Julian," Elena said, "and the FBI has the audio recording of you ordering the hit. I recorded it from my father's phone. He was wearing a wire because he knew you were coming for him. He didn't trigger it in time." A siren wailed in the distance, then another, then a dozen. They were getting louder. "Goodbye, Julian," Elena said. "Enjoy the view. It's the last time you'll see it." Julian scrambled to the window. Below Park Avenue was a sea of flashing red and blue lights. SWAT vans were screeching to a halt, blocking the entrance to the tower. "Sir," it was the helicopter pilot on his radio, "I have unauthorized aircraft entering the airspace. NYPD Aviation is ordering me to ground. I have to leave now. Don't you dare leave me!" Julian roared into the radio. He watched in horror as his helicopter, his last lifeline, lifted off the roof and banked sharply away, pursued by a police chopper. He was trapped. Julian Thorne, the man who moved markets with a whisper, was now a rat in a gold-plated cage. He needed a way out. He ran to his closet and grabbed a duffel bag. He threw in some clothes, a hoodie, jeans, sneakers, shedding his tuxedo like a snake shedding skin. He remembered the service elevator. It was used for freight and trash, bypassing the main lobby security. He sprinted out of the bedroom, down the hall, and punched the button for the service lift. It didn't light up. Electronic lockdown. Elena had hacked the building management system. She had shut down the elevators. "Damn it!" he screamed, kicking the steel doors. He ran to the stairwell. 50 floors. He didn't care. He burst through the fire door and began to descend, taking the steps 3 at a time. By the time he reached the 20th floor, his lungs were burning. He could hear shouting coming from the floors below. The SWAT team was coming up. He stopped on the 15th floor and exited into the hallway. This floor was offices. his own holding company's lower-level analysts. It was deserted at 1 a.m. He moved to the window. He needed to think. He pulled out his phone. He needed an ally. He dialed Senator Holloway. "The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service." He dialed his lawyer, Alan Dersh. "Alan, get me out of this." "Julian," Alan's voice was cold. "Don't call me. I'm watching the news. They just released the Vance tapes. You're radioactive. I'm resigning as your counsel effective immediately. If you call this number again, I'll report your location." Click. Julian stared at the phone. He opened Twitter, X. The top trending topic worldwide was "Nas Thorne is over." There were videos of people cheering outside his headquarters. The leak wasn't just financial data. Elena had released internal emails where Julian mocked his customers, used racial slurs against board members, and detailed his plans to bribe FDA officials. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a pariah. Suddenly, the TV in the office lobby turned on automatically. Breaking news. A reporter stood in front of the Plaza Hotel. "We are receiving confirmed reports that Julian Thorne's assets have been globally frozen. The Department of Justice has issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of racketeering, first-degree murder, and corporate espionage." But the biggest shock comes from the source of the leak. The screen flashed a photo of Eleanor. Eleanor Thorne, previously known as a recluse socialite, has released a statement via a secured server. She claims to have liquidated Thorne's personal fortune and distributed it to the victims of his predatory lending schemes. The estimated amount is over $7 billion. Julian threw a stapler at the TV, shattering the screen. $7 billion. She gave it away. She didn't steal it to keep it. She burned it to ash just to spite him. He heard heavy boots in the stairwell. They were close. He spotted a janitor's closet. He ran inside, grabbing a grey jumpsuit hanging on a hook. He pulled it on over his clothes, grabbed a bucket and a mop, and pulled a cap low over his eyes. He stepped out just as the stairwell door burst open. 4 SWAT officers in tactical gear poured into the hallway, rifles raised. "Clear left, clear right." Julian kept his head down, pushing the mop bucket slowly toward the service elevators. "Hey, you!" one officer shouted. Julian froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Get out of here," the officer barked. "Building is on lockdown. Take the freight down. We overrode it." "Yes, sir," Julian mumbled, doing his best impression of a terrified night cleaner. He stepped into the freight elevator, the doors closing just as he saw the officers kick down the door to the office he had been in seconds ago. He made it to the loading dock. He walked out past the chaos, past the news vans, past the screaming crowds. Nobody looked twice at the hunched figure pushing a trash cart. He was on the street. He was free, but he had nothing. No money, no name, no friends, just the clothes on his back and a burning, obsidian hatred for the woman who had done this. 3 days later, Julian sat in a grime-streaked booth at a 24-hour diner in Queens. He looked like a shadow of himself. He hadn't shaved, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of cheap motel soap. He had managed to scrounge up a few $1,000s from a hidden stash he kept in a locker at a private gym. The only asset Elena had missed, likely because he had opened it under a pseudonym she didn't know. He was eating a cold burger, his eyes glued to the small TV above the counter. The manhunt was national. His face was on every screen. Wanted, armed and dangerous. He needed to leave the country, but with no passport and his face plastered everywhere, airports were death traps. He needed a coyote, someone who moved people who didn't want to be found. He was waiting for a man named Silas. Silas was a legend in the underworld, a fixer who had worked for the Russian mob. The bell above the door jingled. A large man in a leather jacket slid into the booth opposite Julian. You look like hell, Thorne, Silas grunted. Do you have it? Julian whispered, sliding a thick envelope of cash across the table under a napkin. Silas peeked inside. It's light. It's 20,000. It's all I have right now. I can get you more once I get to non-extradition soil. I have accounts in Macau that she couldn't touch. Silas chewed on a toothpick, studying Julian. Macau, huh? You really think you still have accounts? What do you mean? The girl. Elena. Silas chuckled darkly. She didn't just dump your US accounts, Thorne. She scorched the earth. She released the encryption keys for your entire network on the dark web. Every hacker from Moscow to Mumbai has been picking your bones clean for 72 hours. You don't have accounts in Macau. You don't have accounts on Mars. Julian felt the bile rise in his throat. Just get me a boat, Silas. Get me to Mexico. I'll figure it out. Silas didn't move. He kept staring at Julian, a strange look in his eyes. You know, the reward for information leading to your capture is $5 million. Julian stiffened. He slowly reached into his pocket, gripping the small switchblade he had bought at a pawn shop. We had a deal, Silas. We did, Silas said. But then I got a better offer. Julian's eyes widened. Elena? She contacted me an hour ago, Silas said. She knew you'd come to me. She knew about the gym locker, Julian. She let you keep that money so you could afford the bus fare to get here. Why? Julian hissed. Why is she doing this? Because she wants you to know that nowhere is safe, Silas said. He pulled a phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table. She wants to talk to you. Julian stared at the phone. He knew he should run. But he couldn't. He needed to hear her voice. He needed to understand. He picked up the phone. Elena. Hello, husband. Her voice came through, crystal clear. How is the burger? I hear the grease at that diner is terrible for your cholesterol. You bitch, Julian shook. You set me up. You let me escape the penthouse. Of course I did, Elena said. Prison is too easy for you, Julian. In prison, you'd be a celebrity. You'd write a memoir. You'd have lawyers fighting your appeals. I didn't want you in a cell. I wanted you in the gutter. I will find you, Julian swore. I will find you, and I will— You won't find anyone, Elena interrupted. Look out the window, Julian. Julian looked out the diner window. Across the street, 2 unmarked black sedans were idling. Men in suits were stepping out, adjusting their earpieces. The FBI? Julian gasped. Silas didn't sell you out for the reward, Elena said calmly. I bought Silas's debt years ago. He works for me. He called the feds the minute you walked in. I wanted you to have one last burger. I'm not heartless. Why? Julian whispered, tears of rage and despair finally spilling over. I gave you everything. I made you a queen. You made me a prisoner. Elena's voice finally cracked, revealing the fire beneath the ice. You killed my father. You destroyed his company. And then you bought me like a piece of furniture to prove you won. You didn't love me, Julian. You loved possessing me. Well, now you possess nothing. The diner door burst open. FBI, hands in the air. Down! Get down! Julian dropped the phone. He looked at Silas, who was casually sipping his coffee. As the agents tackled Julian to the greasy floor, pressing his face into the linoleum, he heard Elena's voice one last time from the phone lying on the table. Checkmate, Julian. The trial of the people versus Julian Thorne was not just a legal proceeding. It was a televised execution of a legacy. The Southern District of New York had thrown the book at him, charging him with RICO violations, securities fraud, wire fraud, and the first-degree murder of Robert Vance. Julian sat at the defendant's table, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by his public defender. His request for a bespoke Italian suit had been denied by the judge, a woman named Justice Harriet Moore, whom Julian had once publicly insulted at a fundraiser 3 years prior. Karma, it seemed, was efficient. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with former employees, victims of his pension schemes, and reporters. But the one face Julian searched for every day, Elena's, was never there. Mr. Thorne, his public defender, a tired-looking man named Gary, whispered, "I strongly advise you not to take the stand. The prosecution has the audio tapes. They have the financial records. If you testify, they will destroy you." "I am the smartest man in this room, Gary," Julian hissed, his eyes manic. "I can talk my way out of this. I always have. I need to explain context. The jury needs to see the visionary, not the villain." Against legal advice, Julian took the stand on the 14th day of the trial. It was a disaster. The prosecutor, a sharp-witted woman named District Attorney Lopez, didn't ask about the money at first. She asked about Eleanor. "Mr. Thorne, you claimed in your opening statement that your wife was mentally unstable, that she fabricated this evidence out of spite. Is that correct?" "She is hysterical," Julian said smoothly, leaning into the microphone. "She was a charity case I took in. She never understood the complexities of high finance. She's acting out a delusion." D.A. Lopez nodded slowly. "A delusion. Let's play Exhibit G." The screens in the courtroom flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a bank transfer. It was a video. The angle was low, hidden on a bookshelf. The date stamp was from 2 years ago. The video showed Julian pacing the living room of the penthouse. He was screaming at Elena, who was sitting quietly on the sofa. "You are nothing!" The on-screen Julian roared, throwing a crystal tumbler at the wall, inches from Eleanor's head. "You exist because I allow it. If you ever try to leave this apartment without my permission, I will bury you so deep even the worms won't find you." The courtroom gasped. Then, the video cut to another clip. Julian was grabbing Elena by the jaw, forcing her to look at him. "Sign the papers, Elena. Sign them, or I'll have your father's grave dug up and paved over." Julian, sitting on the witness stand, went pale. He hadn't known she was recording inside the house. He thought he had swept for bugs. She baited me," Julian stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. "That's taken out of context. It was a heated argument. We have 400 hours of these heated arguments, Mr. Thorne," D.A. Lopez said coldly. "Elena didn't just document the fraud. She documented the monster." The jury didn't need to deliberate for long. 3 days later, the foreman stood up. Julian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He still believed, somewhere in his delusional mind, that he could buy his way out. Maybe a mistrial. Maybe a hung jury. On the count of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Julian Thorne, guilty. On the count of securities fraud, guilty. On the count of racketeering, guilty. The word rang out 34 times. Guilty. 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 Justice Moore looked down at him over her spectacles. "Julian Thorne, you have lived a life of unchecked greed and cruelty. You treated people as commodities and laws as suggestions. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, plus 150 years. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. As the bailiffs hauled him away, Julian screamed. He didn't scream for mercy. He screamed her name. "Elena! Elena! You can't do this to me! I made you!" But nobody was listening. The King of Wall Street was dragged out the back door, destined for a 6x8 concrete box at the ADX Florence Supermax, a place known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. He would never see a skyline again. The day Elena Vance left New York, The sky was the color of a bruised plum. A winter storm was threatening the coast, but for the first time in 5 years, the turbulence didn't frighten her. She sat in the window seat of a commercial flight, first class but not a private jet. Julian would have sneered at it. He would have called it cattle class for the merely rich. To Eleanor, the hum of the engines sounded like a choir of angels. As the plane banked over the Atlantic, she looked down at the city one last time. From this height, the skyscrapers of Manhattan looked like jagged teeth in a concrete jaw. Somewhere down there, in a holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, Julian Thorne was screaming at a lawyer who could no longer save him. Somewhere down there was the penthouse that had been her prison, the gala hall where she had been a prop, and the grave of the father she had finally avenged. She placed her hand against the cold plastic of the window. "Goodbye," she whispered. The word didn't feel like a sad farewell. It felt like the unlocking of a heavy door. She ordered a glass of white wine from the flight attendant. When it arrived, she didn't toast to Julian's ruin. She didn't toast to revenge. She clinked the glass softly against the armrest and whispered, "To Robert." Then she turned off the overhead light, pulled a blanket over her shoulders, and for the first time since she was 22 years old, she fell into a sleep that was dreamless and absolute. 6 months later. The Amalfi Coast didn't look real. It looked like a painting that God had spent a little too much time perfecting. The cliffs were steep and dramatic, plunging into a sea so blue it made the sky look pale by comparison. Elena had bought Villa della Pace, the Villa of Peace, under a blind trust. It was an old structure, crumbling in places, with ivy strangling the stone walls and a lemon grove that had grown wild from neglect. It was perfect. It was a project. Her life here was quiet. Calculatedly so. She woke with the sun. There were no maids to bring her coffee in bed. She made it herself in a small mocha pot on a gas stove. She enjoyed the ritual of it, the grinding of the beans, the hiss of the steam, the smell of dark roast filling the kitchen. These were the small autonomies Julian had stolen from her. He had controlled what she ate, when she slept, what she wore. Reclaiming the mundane details of her life felt like reclaiming her soul. She spent her mornings in the study, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. This was the headquarters of the Vance Foundation. There were no boardrooms, no suits, no screaming matches. Just Eleanor, a high-speed internet connection, and a team of trusted lawyers and philanthropists she communicated with via encrypted video calls. On this particular Tuesday, the face on her screen was Sarah Jenkins, the former compliance officer at Thorne Dynamics, who had helped Eleanor verify the initial data leak. Sarah was now the director of operations for the foundation. "The Detroit initiative is live, Elena," Sarah said, her voice tinny through the laptop speakers. "We've successfully purchased the debt of 4,000 families. The medical debt, the predatory payday loans. It's all cleared. We sent out the letters yesterday." Elena smiled, leaning back in her chair. "And the reaction?" "Disbelief," Sarah laughed. "People think it's a scam. We've had to set up a hotline just to convince people that yes, a stranger really did pay off their hospital bills. You're changing lives, Elena, real lives." "It's not me," Elena corrected gently. "It's the money. It's just going back to the people it was stolen from. I'm just the delivery service." "You're more than that," Sarah said, her tone turning serious. "By the way, did you see the news? The auction of the Thorne Tower closed today." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Who bought it?" "A consortium of green energy tech firms," Sarah grinned. "They're gutting the executive suites. Julian's office, the one with the shark tank and the mahogany walls. It's going to be a communal cafeteria and a daycare center for the employees' children. Elena laughed. It was a genuine, full-bellied sound that surprised even her. A daycare. He would have hated that. He would have, Sarah agreed. Oh, and Elena. One more thing. A package arrived at our P.O. box in New York. It was forwarded to your secure drop in Naples. You should have it by this afternoon. A package? Elena frowned. From who? The Department of Justice, Sarah said softly. It's from him. The laughter died in Elena's throat. The air in the sunlit room suddenly felt colder. I see, Elena whispered. You don't have to read it, Sarah said quickly. I can have it shredded. I can have it burned. You never have to see his handwriting again. Elena looked out at the ocean. The waves were crashing against the rocks, relentless and rhythmic. No, Elena said, her voice steadying. Send it. I'm not afraid of ghosts, Sarah. After the call, Elena needed to move. She couldn't sit still with the knowledge that Julian's words were making their way up the winding coastal roads toward her. She walked down to the village of Ravello. She was overseeing the restoration of the local library, a 16th century building that had been damaged by an earthquake years ago. It was her passion project. She wasn't just the donor. She was the architect. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and large sunglasses, but the locals knew her simply as Signora Elena. They didn't know she was the ex-wife of the American Wolf of Wall Street. They didn't know she was a billionaire. To them, she was the quiet American woman who tipped well and spoke Italian with a hesitant but elegant accent. She met Marco, the foreman of the construction crew, by the scaffolding. Marco was a man in his 60s, with hands like leather and a face etched by the sun. Signora, Marco greeted her, wiping dust from his forehead. We found something in the foundation. The old archway. The stone is cracked deeper than we thought. Eleanor took the blueprints from him, unfurling them on a wooden table. Her mind sharpened. This was a problem she could solve. Structural integrity, load-bearing walls, physics. Physics made sense. People did not. We can reinforce it with steel tension rods here and here, Elena said, sketching rapidly with a pencil. If we anchor it to the bedrock, we can save the original arch. We don't have to tear it down. Marco looked at the sketch, impressed. You have a good eye, Signora. You build like you intend for things to last forever. Nothing lasts forever, Marco, Elena murmured, looking at the cracked stone. But we can make sure it stands long enough to matter. As she worked, the physical activity grounded her. The dust on her hands, the smell of mortar and old stone. It was real. Julian's world had been made of vapor. Stocks, derivatives, speculation. It was a world of things that didn't exist. Here, she was building a place where children would read books, where history would be preserved. By late afternoon, the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of violent orange and soft lavender. Marco began packing up his tools. Signora, he said, hesitating. The postman. He left a letter for you at the villa gate. He said it required a signature, but since you were here, he left it in your box. Elena froze. The pencil snapped in her hand. Thank you, Marco, she said, her voice tight. Buona serata. The walk back up the hill to the villa felt longer than usual. Her legs felt heavy. The beauty of the lemon grove seemed muted, the scent of the blossoms cloying. When she reached the iron gate of Villa della Pace, she saw it. A thick, white envelope sitting in the black metal box. It bore the official stamp of the United States Federal Penitentiary System. She took it. The paper felt gritty, cheap. She walked into the house, bypassing the kitchen, bypassing the study, and went straight to the terrace. She sat at the small mosaic table overlooking the sea. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. It had been 6 months. In her mind, she knew he was locked away. She knew he was in ADX Florence, buried under a mountain in Colorado, in a concrete box the size of a parking space. But holding the letter, she felt the phantom weight of his hand on the back of her neck. Open it, she told herself. He is just a man. He is a man who lost. She slid her thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. It wasn't the elegant, sweeping cursive Julian used to sign multi-billion-dollar contracts. It was the scrawl of a man losing his mind. She began to read. Elena, they tell me I have 1 hour of sunlight a day. I stand in a cage and look up at a square of sky. It's grey. Everything here is grey. The walls, the floors, the food, the men. I spend 23 hours a day thinking. At first I spent those hours plotting how to kill you. I visualized it in 1,000 different ways. I thought about hiring hits from the inside, about finding your location. But my lawyer tells me you are a ghost. He tells me you have liquidated everything. The penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the cars, even my watch collection. Why? We could have ruled the world, Elena. You have the mind for it. I see that now. The code you wrote, the way you dismantled me. It was brilliant. It was the only thing in my life that was ever truly equal to me. I underestimated you. That was my sin. Not the murder, not the fraud. My sin was thinking you were weak. I am writing this because I have nothing left. My friends have forgotten me. My legacy is ash. The name Thorn is a curse word in the financial districts. You stripped me of my armor and now I am freezing. Please, I am begging you. Send me something. A photo of the outside world, a book, $1. Just acknowledge that I am still alive. Hate me if you want, but do not ignore me. The silence is louder than the screaming. Do I cross your mind? Do you dream of me? I am still your husband. Julian Eleanor read the letter twice. The first time, she felt a flare of the old fear. The tone of possession, I am still your husband, made her skin crawl. But the second time she read it, she felt something else. Pity. Not the warm pity of compassion, but the cold, distant pity one feels for a rabid animal that has finally been put down. He still didn't understand. He thought her revenge was about power. He thought she destroyed his empire because she wanted to beat him at his own game. He didn't understand that she didn't want to win. She just wanted to be free. She looked at the date on the letter. He had written it 3 weeks ago. It had taken that long to clear the censors and cross the ocean. 3 weeks of him waiting, pacing his cell, wondering if she would answer. She picked up her pen. She pulled a piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery from her notebook. She hovered the pen over the paper. She could write him a diatribe. She could tell him about the library she was building. She could tell him about the children in Detroit who were sleeping soundly because his stolen money had paid for their safety. She could tell him that she was happy. But telling him anything would be a gift. It would be a connection. It would give him a thread to pull on. He wanted to be hated, because hate is a passion. Hate means he still matters. Elena put the pen down. No, she said aloud. The word was carried away by the wind. She stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. The sun was gone now, replaced by the bruised twilight. The first stars were appearing over the Mediterranean. She held Julian's letter in her hand. She took a lighter from her pocket, one she kept for the citronella candles. She flicked the wheel. The flame danced, small and yellow against the blue dusk. She touched the flame to the corner of the yellow legal paper. The fire caught instantly. It curled the edges, turning Julian's desperate scrawl into black carbon. She watched the fire consume the words, "We could have ruled the world." She watched it eat the words, "I am still your husband." She held the paper until the heat stung her fingertips. Then she dropped it into a heavy stone ashtray. She watched it burn until it was nothing but a pile of fragile grey ash. She didn't write a reply. She didn't send a photo. She didn't send $1. She gave him exactly what he feared most. Silence. Elena walked back into the villa. The house was dark, but she didn't turn on the lights immediately. She liked the shadows now. They were soft, comforting. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Marco. "Signora, I forgot to mention. The village is having a festival tonight. Fireworks at midnight. You should watch from the terrace." Elena smiled. She went back out to the balcony. Below in the harbour, she could see the lights of fishing boats bobbing on the water. She could hear the faint sound of music drifting up from the town square. An accordion, laughter, life. She thought of Julian in his soundproof concrete box. He was in a place where time didn't move. She was in a place where time flowed like wine. She took a sip of her drink and leaned against the railing. She wasn't Elena Thorne anymore. She wasn't even really Elena Vance, the vengeful daughter. She was just a woman standing on a cliff, breathing air that belonged to no one but herself. The first firework shot up from the harbour, a streak of gold that exploded into a starburst of red and green. The boom echoed off the cliffs. Elena didn't flinch. She watched the light reflect in her eyes, brighter than any diamond Julian had ever forced her to wear. "Checkmate," she whispered into the night. And then she turned her back on the sea, walked inside, and closed the door. And that is how the god of Wall Street truly fell. Not with a bang, but with a silence that deafened him. Julian Thorne sits in a concrete box, waiting for a letter that will never come, realizing that his greatest punishment isn't the prison bars. It's the fact that the world has moved on without him. Elena didn't just survive him. She outgrew him. She turned his legacy of greed into a foundation of hope, proving that the best revenge isn't just destroying your enemy. It's living a beautiful life after they are gone. What a ride. I really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the fall of Julian Thorne. It's a powerful reminder that no amount of money can buy loyalty or peace. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Elena was right to burn the letter and give him silence? Or should she have sent him one final message to crush him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story, please hit that like button. It helps us create more long-form dramas like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our upload. We have an even crazier revenge story coming next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.